Okay, a little late, but better here than never. We have got a lot to talk about on this Wednesday. What a week it's already been. A five-star defensive lineman shocked all of college football when he chose to stay home as opposed to go to the Oklahoma Sooners and Williams Nwaneri. But today, we need to turn our attention to two other battles for five-star prospects. First and foremost, a five-star defensive back that the Texas Longhorns look to be surging for. Secondly, we need to turn our attention to a five-star defensive lineman, the number 2 defensive lineman in the nation, and talk about how his battle is really starting to heat up. After that, we need to look towards the Texas Longhorns and talk about their season expectations. We then need to talk about something Nick Saban said that if you tuned into the show on Monday, you probably heard me say. And then finally, we need to talk about the USC Trojans. Ask the question, will they be able to make the college football playoffs? And if the answer to that is yes, will they be able to win a national championship? All things we aim to hit today. If y'all are in here, go ahead and hit the like button. Be sure to comment down below. Those interactions are awesome. But with all that being said, let's head right into this. And for the Texas Longhorns, just a week ago, you landed a five-star prospect in your state. And honestly, it's probably going to be the biggest win of this recruiting cycle. Not to downplay any of the wins Steve Sarkisian and company will get hereafter, but whenever we talk about what Steve Sarkisian in Texas needed more than anything in this recruiting class, the answer was simple. It was the edge. We go back to last year. What did Steve Sarkisian and company need more than anything? Inside linebacker help. They got the number 1 inside linebacker. This year, they need an edge. They get the number 1 edge, but that's not the only need they have. They need to be building up that secondary. So where do the Longhorns turn their attention? Well, none other than five-star defensive back in the state of Texas, Kobe Black, an individual that multiple teams were after. But as we sit here and talk, the Texas Longhorns look like they are in a fantastic place to go ahead and win that recruiting battle. And we're talking about schools such as Alabama, Texas A&M, Oklahoma, all after the very talented five-star defensive back. If Texas is able to keep him home, that is going to be a phenomenal addition to this recruiting class. And if you are the Texas Longhorns, your goal is to stack as much five-star talent as you can before you make that move to the SEC. Get as much depth as you can before you make that transition for multiple different reasons. In the case of Kobe Black, we look and multiple other schools that are involved in this battle. Well, they just happen to be SEC schools. So you get to get a five-star defensive back in, but more importantly, you get to keep a five-star defensive back away from the likes of Texas A&M, from the likes of Oklahoma, from the likes of Nick Saban and the Crimson Tide. So I think that is a phenomenal addition for the Longhorns, but it goes to prove something we said not long ago. Whenever Colin Simmons committed to Texas, I said this could be a snowball type recruitment. And what I mean when I say that is when you roll a snowball down the mountain, it starts very small, but it doesn't take long for it to start picking up steam and getting larger as it acquires more and more snow as it rolls. That's what Colin Simmons could be to this Texas Longhorns class. He could be to this class what Arch Manning was to the previous class. Whenever Arch Manning made that commitment and we saw an avalanche of guys follow. Colin Simmons is the type of player that other players are going to be drawn to, other players want to play with, and I think we're already starting to see some of that come to fruition. The other day, a four-star defensive back made his commitment to the Florida Gators over the Texas Longhorns, and while that's a phenomenal win for the Florida Gators and Mac, to me, it painted the picture that Steve Sarkisian and company are in a really good place for Kobe Black. In fact, I think if we were talking right now and saying Kobe Black is committing tomorrow, where do I think he will go? I think the answer is the Texas Longhorns. They have multiple crystal ball predictions being inserted in favor of the Longhorns, and he would be a phenomenal piece to this class. Now, he's not the only five-star that Steve Sarkisian are after Colin Simmons. There's another battle we're going to have to be watching closely because it is going to be fascinating. The Oklahoma Sooners and the Texas Longhorns are going to line up once again across from each other, not on the gridiron, but for a battle we see time and time again, which is one of the reasons why the Red River Shootout is one of the premier rivalries in the sport. It's not just relegated to the football field or the court or wherever those two schools happen to meet up. We see those battles take place in recruiting all year round. That's why I love these rivalries, Ohio State and Michigan, Alabama, Auburn, Georgia, Texas, Oklahoma. It's not just relegated to when the teams actually meet. You get these battles 24/7, 365. And in the case of Dominic McKinley, we are going to be treated to another one of those battles. Dominic McKinley looks to have a top three of Texas, Oklahoma, LSU, no particular order right there. But it is important to note that Oklahoma has been in this battle for a long time. The defensive line is where they have prioritized. That's going to be where they're putting all their eggs into the basket from here on out, is those defensive line guys that are still available. But Texas has really surged in this battle. I mean, they have made up a lot of ground really quickly, and it's one we have got to watch. Dominic McKinley is a quasi five-star, depending on where you look. Personally, I think he will finish up as a five-star. But if you can lift him out the state of Louisiana, you've already won a very difficult battle. And two, he is going to be incredibly important to any of the three institutions that are currently duking it out for him, Texas, Oklahoma, or Louisiana. So right now, as we sit here and talk, phenomenal recruiting battles going on. And what makes it even more special is the college football season is here. I know that a game isn't being played for another 2 weeks, but it's here. Everything about college football has finally arrived. We finally feel like we're in a familiar place. What better way to kick off the college football season than with phenomenal recruiting battles that we get to talk about alongside some camp action? And that's exactly where we need to turn our attention right now. We need to talk about some expectations for the Texas Longhorns, because the other day we were talking about Texas and what fans need to expect from the Longhorns this year. And I didn't give you all a number in terms of games they needed to win, but I did say this right here. Texas must be in the Big 12 championship this year, barring wild injuries, right? It's football. One thing we all need to acknowledge is if the injury bug bites, that's out of any coach's control. You hope you have the adequate depth to be able to outlast the injury bug. But Bear Bryant said it best once. To win a national championship, you have to be very disciplined, very talented, and a little bit lucky, because the game of football is very, very grueling. So outside of the injury bug, if you're the Texas Longhorns, you need to be playing in the Big 12 championship. You have the talent, and more so than having the talent, let's look at the talent they do have. You return a quarterback that's in year 2 with Steve Sarkisian, who we know what he does as an offensive mind. You might have questions about Steve Sarkisian as a head coach, and those questions are fair. It needs to be shown. Those are fair questions. Meet me halfway. You're not having any questions about him as an offensive mind. I think we can all sit around the table and agree about that right there. Even if we disagree about the outlook of where Texas sits, what they can do this year, the ceiling Sark can give them as the head coach, even if we disagree with all of that, you'll meet me halfway and say, yeah, but offensively, they're as dangerous as anybody in the nation because of the scheme they're running, because of the guy at the helm. And it really helps then when that guy who's so dangerous offensively returns a quarterback like a Quinn Ewers, a quarterback that, once again, you may have questions about, but when everything is clicking, he is very gifted. He's going into year 2 under this system, and I know people are going to say it's technically his 3rd year in college football, because it technically is. He left South Lake Carroll before his senior year, I apologize, to go to Ohio State. But one thing we need to acknowledge about that whole situation is he got to Ohio State in like August. There's no quarterback battle that's happening then with a guy that just walked through the door. When we look at that Ohio State quarterback room, they had 3 quarterbacks that ranked as blue chip quarterbacks, and 2 of them were 5-stars. They're not just going to hand the 3rd 5-star the 2nd place position in this quarterback battle because you're Quinn Ewers. That's not how it's going to work at a place like Ohio State. They recruit too well. They have too much talent. Your name isn't going to earn you a position on that depth chart. You're going to have to go out and take it. Unfortunately for Quinn Ewers, he just didn't get there in time to be able to really learn the system. By the time he got there, the quarterback learning the system, that took place during the summer. That took place during the spring. That took place through the fall camp before he had gotten there. By the time he got there, he was just there to go through the motions, continue learning, and try and continue developing. So his first real season, by all measures, was last year with Steve Sarkisian. Even though he was already in college football, we do need to talk about that little nuance that goes into that. He was up and down last year. He had moments where you watched Quinn Ewers play and you felt like, man, if he plays like that all the time, college football is on notice. But then we also saw the swing. And to me, that's indicative of a young quarterback, which is why I'm so intrigued to see what they're able to do this year. Yes, they lose Bijan Robinson. Yes, they lose Roschon. And I think Roschon is a loss that people aren't talking enough about because obviously everybody's going to point to Bijan Robinson because that's just the natural name to point to whenever we're asking what's Texas's offense going to do? How are they going to replace some of the losses they had? Everybody's going to point to Bijan. And I don't blame anybody for doing so. But we also need to remember that Roschon created a very effective 1-2 punch for the Longhorns. Now, luckily, they've recruited the running back position very well. They just got a 5-star in Baxter. They have Jaden Blue. They have Jonathan Brooks, guys that I watched at the high school ranks in Texas tear it up. And they have Keelan Robinson, a guy who, as an Alabama fan, I can tell you first and foremost, that young man has the juice. It's just about allowing him to get the opportunities to show what he can do. But luckily, Keelan Robinson offers a little bit of juice. I don't know that the other guys do. Not saying they don't, but he can get active in every facet of the game. Special teams, the passing game, the running game, you name it. Keelan Robinson is your chess piece. And with Steve Sarkisian, super excited to see what that means. So even though I didn't give you a game total last time we talked about Texas, I'm going to give you one today. 10 wins. 10 wins for the Texas Longhorns is, in my opinion, where they have to be. Because if we look at this, they start off against Rice. That's a give me. Alabama is going to be sensational. And I'm going to tell you right now why this game and a game such as LSU, Florida State are so important, so good for the fans, for college football, and for those teams. Because if you're Texas, you get to look at your schedule and say, after week 2, we feel like everything else, though there are talented teams on our schedule, we feel like by week 2, we have faced the biggest challenge on our schedule. Now, we also have to acknowledge the Red River rivalry. Rivalry games are such that every bit of conventional wisdom goes out the window. So that game is always going to be a really must-watch game. Even when Auburn is having down years, which they have had recently, I'll be the first to tell you, whenever the Iron Bowl gets here, any conventional wisdom you walk into that game with, throw it out the window. Auburn could be terrible. Alabama could be awesome. Throw it out the window. Even if all conventional wisdom is saying Bama is going to boat race Auburn, it'll end up being a close game a lot of the times because that's what rivalry games do. So outside of that Oklahoma game, if you're Texas, you look at the rest of your schedule and you say, we've played the toughest team we're going to face in the regular season all year, the Crimson Tide, week 2. And if you're Alabama, you get to look at that game in week 2 and say, hey, we get a real good idea of who we are before we jump into this SEC league play. And even looking around the SEC league play we have, outside of a team like LSU, A&M is very, very talented. Arkansas returns KJ Jefferson and Rocket Sanders, but I have serious questions about that defense. And Ole Miss, I like Lane Kiffin, but I don't know what they're doing there. Outside of Texas A&M and LSU in the regular season, if you're Alabama, you look at Texas and say, well, they are going to get us prepared for what's to come. So having that game early for Texas and Alabama, in my opinion, is awesome for both teams because whichever team walks out of that building holding a loss, they can go undefeated in their conference, still make the conference championship, and still have a chance at the college football playoffs. And they will have been able to start their season getting a real good test and a real good look as to who they are. That game will make everybody better so long as everybody walks out of that game healthy. And that's what we're really wishing for here. If Alabama, Texas, Florida State, LSU, if they walk out of that game healthy, all those teams are going to be better for having experienced that because they can all look forward. And in the case of Florida State, LSU, if you're Florida State, you probably feel like outside of Clemson, we're not going to face anybody like LSU. If you're LSU, you're saying, okay, outside of Bama and A&M and some teams in the SEC that have talent, we're not going to face someone like Florida State. So outside of the Alabama game, where does Texas go next? Well, you have Wyoming, a game they should win. You have Baylor, you have Kansas, Oklahoma, Houston, BYU, Kansas State, TCU, Iowa State, and then Texas Tech. Now, Texas Tech is an interesting team. I grant you that. They were a team that I think are going to continue improving, but they're not going to have a candle to Texas this year, in my opinion, because Texas needs to show everybody this is the last year of us in the Big 12. We have been down for far too long, but it is our time. If you're Steve Sarkisian and the Texas Longhorns, that's exactly what you're hoping for. You have got to have that show me season. And there's no time like the present. Because when you get to the SEC, it's going to look a little bit different. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you that every single game you're going to play in the SEC, that's a college football playoff game. No, there are teams in the SEC that have good years and bad years. That's just the nature of the league. But what I will tell you is that there's a collection of talent, right? Like in a lot of conferences, you have your teams at the top and then you have your teams at the bottom. But what I think makes the SEC interesting is the middle portion of the conference. You have your teams at the top that perennially run the SEC, and I know a lot of people like to point to those teams being Alabama, being Georgia, being an LSU, and saying, yes, but the SEC gets carried by those three brands. And those three brands are largely the most consistent. I grant you that. But in my opinion, it's what happens in the middle of the conference that makes it so difficult on a week-in, week-out basis. Because that middle ground, anything can happen there, and that's what makes the league so much fun. So if you're Texas, you want to go into that situation with all the momentum in the world. There's no better way to do that than by winning the Big 12. And yes, we can say the same for Oklahoma, but we also need to remember Steve Sarkisian is a full year ahead of Brent Venables in terms of recruiting, in terms of getting the schemes he wants in, all of it. And in college football, that year is huge. And on top of that, he didn't have half the team ripped away whenever the coaching regime changed. Now, that being said, we can argue other little areas of nuance for Texas and why things the way they were. And Sark had to overcome that. He's still having to overcome that, which is part of the reason why I remain high on Texas, part of the reason why I remain high on Brent Venables whenever someone says they can't do this, that, or the other. Steve Sarkisian, Brent Venables, any coach around the nation, they are not responsible for the sins of the father. They can only do what they can control. And so I'm fascinated for the Big 12 this year. Your two biggest brands are going out, and Texas is a team that returns so much talent. The wide receiving core still intact, still very gifted. You look at your tight end room, you love what you have. You want to talk about offensive line. Kelvin Banks is an individual that if he keeps on playing at the level he played at last season, if he replicates that season this year, he looks to be a first rounder. I mean, he is sensational. You have Campbell, another 5-star along that offensive line that per reports I've heard, he looks to be really finding his own way there as well. And one thing we have to acknowledge, offensive line is a position that can take a while to come in there, get adjusted because of the massive difference in size, speed, strength, technique required to excel at the position as it relates to college as opposed to high school football. In high school football, I say this all the time. You could be the number one tackle in the nation and you're asked to guard me on a Friday night. Now, if you put together on film that you handle me all 4 quarters and that I can't get past you, that's spectacular. But there's a lot of difference between blocking me for 4 quarters and then going to college that next year and lining up against a guy like Dallas Turner. And now you got to block him for 4 quarters. You get what I mean? There's 2 totally different structures here. There's no baseline athleticism in high school football. There is a baseline athleticism at the Power 5 level. So I'm never surprised when these offensive linemen take a little bit. But for Texas, you have got a very talented offensive line. You've got a very good offensive line coach. And you got some pieces that at this point, they aren't new anymore. And I think that's big. We talked about you having to replace something at the running back position. That is interesting to see. But Steve Sarkisian has always figured out the running back position. That's an area that he has always been able to excel at. And I do like the talent they have. We're not saying it's Bijan, but Bijan is also special. As long as you have a adequate running back, I think they can get something figured out, and I think they have that. If we look at the defensive side of the ball, there's a lot of excitement. There's a lot of questions. I think a lot of Texas fans wish that Colin Simmons was enrolling this year and that he would be on campus because they do need help at the edge. That's the one area for Texas's defense that I look like that I don't know what they're going to do, but I do know that PK is creative, and that's his wheelhouse, is the edge and specifically the front 7. So he's going to figure something out. The inside linebackers, getting Anthony Hill in was huge for the Longhorns. Absolutely huge. A little bit of a hot take. As big as Arch Manning was to that class, and he was massive, and he is turning heads at the Texas practices, which is awesome to hear. Guys, in a perfect world, in my opinion, at least the way I look at this, I would be happiest if I heard all of these kids went to college and were really excelling. That would make me happier than anything. The reason I'm doing this is because I love telling stories of triumph, success, and perseverance. So I'd be happiest if all of these recruits ended up going and working out. But Arch Manning, a guy that was so talked about, he's turning heads at these Texas practices. It's practice. It's practice. We're not saying he's going to be a Heisman winner. But we're saying it's good to hear that a young quarterback who's a freshman is coming along, finding some confidence. As big of a win as he was for that Texas class, hot take, Anthony Hill was the biggest win last year for the Longhorns. The biggest win. He wasn't the highest rated player for the Longhorns. Anthony Hill was the biggest win for that Texas recruiting class, and I'm going to tell you why. Because this year, whenever they hit the football field, Anthony Hill could be out there making a real difference in multiple areas. Now, don't get me wrong. If Arch is finding his confidence, if that is going well, then he's pushing those other quarterbacks in front of him, right? Iron sharpens iron. That's what we want. That's what every team is aiming for. But Anthony Hill, his effect will be tangible. You will know where he is. I think Anthony Hill was the biggest win of that Texas recruiting class, and he is going to be a huge position I'm going to be watching. And then we talk about the secondary. And a name that gets lost is Catalon. Ladies and gentlemen, when Jalen Catalon was healthy for the Arkansas Razorbacks, he was sensational. Now, the issue here is health, and a quote that has always stuck with me since I heard it: the best ability is availability. Is he available? I don't know. I can't say that for you yet because I don't have an ability to peer into the future. But what I can tell you is if he is available, he is a difference maker through and through. A difference maker through and through. He is going to go in there and help that secondary out tremendously. A secondary that already has some pieces I'm super interested in. Malik Muhammad is a very, very, very talented guy. You got some guys that I think are otherworldly talented. Very excited to see what it looks like this year. So expectations for the Texas Longhorns: 10 wins, Big 12 championship. And I think one of the beautiful things about your schedule is that you open up week 2 with Alabama in a game that if you walk out of there with a win, you're well prepped for the rest of your schedule. If you walk out of there with a loss, you're well prepped for the rest of your schedule. You've played the most talented team you will face all year long. And oh, by the way, as long as you win out in league play, you're going to the Big 12 championship. You could still theoretically go to the college football playoffs, which is why it's so beautiful for both Texas, for Alabama, and in another game, LSU, Florida State. Get prepped really early with a fantastic team that as long as you have a good showing, you can win out the rest of your season and be A-okay. So for Texas, Big 12 championship is where they need to be. It has been long enough. The Texas fans are craving that level of success, and they deserve it. They deserve it. They've had to see we are back so many times that I'm not going to be the one to do that to you. I'm not going to be the one to tell you Texas is back. They need to be the ones to tell everybody they're back. And I think this is a beautiful segue into our next talking point because it's the same type of theory. It's not for me to tell you when Texas is back. That's transcended. It's not for anybody in the media to tell you Texas is back. And make no mistake, I'm certainly not saying that. It's for Texas to declare they're back. And in that same logic, we need to turn our attention to the Crimson Tide. Because the other day, Nick Saban said something that if you tuned in to this show on Monday, and Van, I know you were in here, you can back me up on this. If you tuned in to Through the Haze on Monday, you heard me say something that if you were observant, you would have listened to Nick Saban say it yesterday and say, wait, I've heard that before. Nick Saban said something yesterday that has taken social media by storm, and it's something we need to briefly talk about. Whenever we look at the quarterback battle for Alabama, that's one of the most hotly contested battles, one of the most highest expectation battles in the nation. Let's be honest here. But Nick Saban said something very wise. He said, and that goes without saying, but he was saying, it's not I don't want to pick a quarterback. One of these quarterbacks needs to take the job. And that echoes exactly what we were talking about right here on Monday. In a perfect world, Nick Saban doesn't crown anybody quarterback. In a perfect world, Ty Buckner, Ty Simpson, or Jalen Milroe take the job. Be undeniable. And this goes for more than just football, right? This is one of those times where, one of the beautiful times where in talking about college football, I get to be a little bit of a life coach, which that's up to you to listen to, right? Because you know what it is. Be undeniable. That is basically what we're asking for here. It's what I'm asking for from Texas. It's what I'm asking for from the Alabama quarterback situation. Be undeniable. Because if you're undeniable, there's no stopping you in anything you do, whether it's doing this in the morning, whether it's going out, working out, whether it's be undeniable in everything you do. And if you're undeniable, we will get to an impasse. We will get to an intersection where there's no ability to take away what you have done. Nobody will be able to hold the cards to diminish what it is you've done because you've been able to move mountains. And when we look at the Alabama quarterback room right now, we heard out of the first scrimmage, the fall camp, Jalen Milroe really looked good. What I hope for going into the second scrimmage is that he continues to be undeniable. Because at the end of the day, that's what Alabama needs. They need one of these guys to step up and be undeniable. Nick Saban doesn't need to give anybody the job. One of these guys need to take the job. And in doing so, you're winning the team, you're winning the coaching staff, and inherently, you're winning the position. Which one of these guys do it? I have no idea. If I was a betting man right now, based on what I've been told, Jalen Milroe is really starting to find his own, and it reminds me of that Blake Sims season a few years ago. I think it was 2016, where Blake Sims worked all summer long with the wide receivers. He wasn't supposed to be the starting quarterback now. Everybody thought it would be someone else. But Blake Sims put his head down and grinded all summer long. We fast forward to where we are right now. Jalen Milroe put his head down and grinded all summer long, went and worked out with those wide receivers when they went to Florida to train. Jalen Milroe was there, throwing, making sure his chemistry was right. Be undeniable. That's what Nick Saban is asking for. And I think whenever we're talking Nick Saban, we need to realize this is the master psychologist. This applies to far more than just football. That applies to everything in your life. So that's something I thought was very interesting. Hearing Nick Saban say he doesn't want to give the job to anybody. Someone needs to take the job. Because that echoed exactly what we talked about here on the channel on Monday, a day before. I don't want Nick Saban to give someone the job. I want someone to take the job. It's very interesting. Let's hit some comments before we move on. That'll believe Sark has only won 9 in his career and still hasn't shown he can make it. The in-game adjustments, fascinated to see. And like I said, Jason, you're not wrong. This is a show me year for Texas. But I also think that Sark is an interesting figure in his own right when we talk about the history of Steve Sarkisian, what's led him to right here. I think there's a level of nuance that we have to acknowledge. But at the end of the day, you're not wrong. Texas has not achieved the level they wanted to. Steve Sarkisian as a head coach has not achieved at the level he would like to. And now it's time to fix that. So let's see if they can rectify it. This is the year. Awesome to see. Don't sleep on Jalen Ford. Absolutely, RJ. Absolutely. There's a few pieces on that Texas defense that are going to be very, very sneaky good. Bro, Dallas Turner is no Ty Haze. You know, I didn't want to brag like that, but I guess since it's out there already, what are you going to do? Kelvin Banks had to block against 4 first-rounders last year and didn't allow a single. I want this one to marinate for a bit, Odd Future, because this is an absurd stat. And it's not only that he went against 4 first-rounders. He went against what I consider to be a generational talent in Will Anderson in terms of what Will brings to the table. Remember now, whenever they were doing their speed tests at Alabama for 10-yard splits, there was only one other person on that roster that was faster than Will Anderson. Jalen Waddle. Think about that. The man who ran a 4.2 something was the only person on that roster faster in the first 10 or 15 yards than Will Anderson. Jalen Waddle. That's freaky. That's different, right? Like, I don't care who you are, even if you're the biggest Auburn fan that has ever lived, meet me halfway. That's different. Just a different type of athlete coming off the edge. The speed, the power, the violence, it's different. And odd future, you're 100% right. Kelvin Banks looked like a seasoned vet out there. If he replicates the season he had last year, this year, and takes it again, he's going to be a top 10 pick in the NFL draft. I don't see how he won't. If he continues the level we're seeing from him, unbelievable player, unbelievable football player. What an addition by the Texas Longhorns. God, what an addition. Let's see what else we have. K-State is in their way, and I don't believe they can do it. Yeah, K-State is going to be an interesting team this year, Sooner, Brandon, because we look at K-State. They lost Deuce Vaughn. They have some guys that I still really like, but it's a very disciplined team. Excuse me, not defense. They're a very disciplined team. And discipline in college football can get you a long ways now. You want me to prove this real quick? That Alabama team last year was unbelievable. Talent-wise, unbelievable. But they were so undisciplined. I think they were like 100 they were in the bottom 10 teams in the nation in penalties per game. They were that undisciplined. And still, they only lost 2 games by a combined 4 points. Now, we can point to some of the other close wins they have, but once again, they had close wins while having 17 penalties against the Texas Longhorns, 17 penalties. Now, let's cross that with another team that doesn't have the level of talent, Utah. Utah goes out there and kicks ass all the time because Kyle Whittingham is a disciplined coach. Kansas State is disciplined, and that's what makes Kansas State a fun team to watch, a fun team to root for, but also for someone, if you're just a college football fan who may be a Pac-12 fan, maybe you're a Big Ten fan, maybe you're an ACC fan or an SEC fan, watching Kansas State's always fun because they're disciplined. And that can get you a long ways in football and in life. Discipline. Sometimes discipline that'll get you a lot further than talent. When you go to college, you figure that out real quick. Someone asked about Patty Gasso versus Saban. Hey, look, I'm not here to take anything away from that lady. What she does as a softball coach is wild. Wild. Unbelievable. Arkansas fans are living off the success of Bama. I disagree, Hank. I think Arkansas has a very exciting team this year. 1, I love Sam Pittman as a head coach. 2, KJ Jefferson, I think, is one of the better quarterbacks in the league that we aren't really talking about near as much as we should. 3, I think they might have the most undervalued offensive player, maybe, in college football right now, because you only hear the name Rocket Sanders if you're talking to an Arkansas fan or someone like myself who's real deep in the weeds of the SEC football. Rocket Sanders is spectacular. They returned both of those. Now, where I am interested in Arkansas, Hank, that I'm more worried about Arkansas here than a lot of other people, so I am going to meet you halfway. Their defense last year was awful against the pass, terrible against the pass. They lost some talented wide receivers, and what I'm most worried about is you were terrible against the pass last year, and you lose Drew Sanders and Bumper Pool to the NFL draft. That's a lot of talent, man, that you lost. Those 2 guys, Bumper Pool, Drew Sanders, did phenomenal work for the Razorbacks on that defense. How do they mitigate those losses? That's what I'm really, really interested in. Lester says, Ty, when Jaden Jackson was ready to commit to Texas, David Stone tweeted and told him that's not where it's at, fam. So I think it's Miami and OU battle at the moment. Lester, it's crazy you said that because that's the next topic we're heading into. I volunteer for the job coach. There you go. Wish OU could, brother, everybody wish they had that kind of speed coming off the edge. It's not normal. It's not normal to be 6'4", 245, 250 pounds, and the only person, remember, Devontae Smith is there. You still have all those talented guys. You still have the DBs that are playing in the NFL right now that went in the first round. You have all of those guys. And the second fastest guy on the team between 0 and 15 yards was Will Anderson. Only one faster, Jalen Waddle, a guy that runs a 4.2. That's freaky. And it just goes to show what an impressive outing Kelvin Banks had against him. A war those two had. An absolute war. Odd, if you want to go back, watch their battles, man, because they were spectacular. Will would push him back, and then you'd see, just unbelievable battle. Awesome battle. Love that you pointed that out. In year 3, we'll find out what kind of game time coach Sark is. He has to know the clock better in game. One of many standout issues I saw in the last 2 years. Joshua, great point, my man. Great point here. And this is one of the biggest, most perplexing things with Sark, especially coming off of working with Nick Saban, is the in-game adjustments. Now, in fairness, I say that I am my own biggest critic. Before anybody can type it down, do not say I'm not consistent, unbiased, or fair. In fairness to Sark there, Bama destroyed themselves last year because they refused to adjust. If you're a Texas fan, Joshua, you'll know that whenever Bama played Texas, they had that one DB on Xavier Worthy, and they left him on an island, and that guy got cooked over and over and over and over. And it wasn't until about halfway through the second quarter, maybe into the third quarter, they said, let's put Terrion Arnold out there. And even though Xavier Worthy still did Xavier Worthy things, let's be honest, at least there was a defensive back that was running stride for stride with Xavier Worthy. At least there was a defensive back that was in the same vicinity as the guy that could make him work for it. We fast forward to the Tennessee game. They're in that bunch set, motion out of the bunch set to isolate the slot wide receiver on the safety, and they killed Alabama with that bunch motion over and over and over again. So, look, the lack of adjustments, that's something that Sark has to improve on, but that's something that a lot of teams have to improve on. But specifically, Joshua, it is a real big issue with Texas. It has been a real big issue with Steve Sarkisian, and I can't wait to see how they fix it. Casey Lane says, watch out for the other 5-star offensive lineman from the 22 class for Texas and DJ Campbell, 6'3", 340, uber athletic with long arms. And Casey, are they sliding him into guard? Because I think you slide him into guard. Oh my goodness. I remember when he was coming out, very, very athletic guy. Unbelievably gifted. And that was what made that offensive line haul by Kyle Flood so incredible, because he had just came off an offensive line haul for Alabama that included the number 1 tackle in the nation, the number 2 tackle in the nation, the number 1 guard in the nation, and the number 1 center in the nation. I'm sorry, the number 2 guard in the nation, number 1 center in the nation. And I was saying to everybody, this is the greatest offensive line class ever assembled, until the same man that assembled that class went to Texas and assembled the one that y'all had. Kyle Flood is Himothy. Yeah, there we go. Sorry, guys. I was way up in the comments, so I gotta go and check out some of this. It will be worth every dollar once his IMG brother lines up next to him in Norman. Look, guys, NIL is legal now, right? So if you're paying a kid NIL money, you're paying him NIL money. That's the name of the game now. You better be paying. Miami, Ohio State, Texas are all paying the same money. I know you came in with a crazy and look, everybody's paying. Everybody out there. Let's get to some recent comments, because then we need to move on. I think a big problem last year with Bama was O'Brien. That man had the same exact problems when he was head coach of the Texans. That's a rabbit hole, Legion. I will go down if we have time at the end of this, because that is fascinating, in my opinion, to really understand why I think the schematics of Bill O'Brien failed. But I will charge anybody with this. Go back and watch Alabama's offense with Bill O'Brien and find me how many times they attack the middle of the field, and you're going to be amazed at how few times they're attacking the middle of the field. In fact, if you want to go and watch the Auburn game where Bryce Young pulled out heroics within the last minute and a half of that game, fourth quarter, Bama's down, he does that smile and then goes and wins the game with the pass to Ja'Cory Brooks. Bama didn't start attacking the middle of the field until they were finally able to start moving the ball. So that's a whole thing. Yeah, he's already taken over right guard in fall camp. Yeah, he's at right guard. Yep. Great placement for him. I remember watching him thinking he can be a tackle, but man, you put him at guard and NFL teams are going to be all over him. I'll tell you who's a little bit like that as well. Mawanoa, the tackle that Miami just got. That cat right there is freaky, y'all. Like, if they want to put him at guard, he's going to be making major money. If they want to put him at tackle, he's going to be making major money. Super athletic individual. Super athletic. Stone is coming home. And with this right here, there's no better place for us to turn to. The battle for David Stone is heating up. Now, guys, this is a battle we've talked about for about a year now. The Oklahoma Sooners have been pushing. They have a lot of strong relationships with David Stone, a lot of ties. He has ties to the state of Oklahoma. And there was a time whenever the team we were talking about outside of the Oklahoma Sooners was Michigan State. Now, I never knew how I felt about the Michigan State hype for several reasons. I think there's a lot of uncertainty at Michigan State right now. But more than that, the defensive line coach for Michigan State a few months ago left that job and took the job at Georgia Tech. Whenever that happened, I was like, okay, so Michigan State is already in a little bit of hot water, and now their defensive line coach that's been doing phenomenal work on the trail, because it wasn't just David Stone. I mean, if we really looked through it, he was after several guys doing great work on the trail, looked to be at least putting Michigan State in a place. I don't think that's the case anymore. In fact, I think there is a new team that if you're Oklahoma, you need to be eyeing. That's Miami. We know Mario Cristobal can recruit. We have questions about Mario Cristobal. I have questions about Mario Cristobal, a guy I really, really like in terms of I want Mario Cristobal to succeed. He comes from the Saban tree. I'd love for him to go out there and kill it. My biggest question with Cristobal is, what does your offense look like? Because that was my biggest question for Cristobal whenever he was at Oregon. But the one area nobody in this chat will question Cristobal on is recruiting. The man can recruit. David Stone's at IMG, meaning he's already in the state of Florida. He doesn't have to go far to maintain being in the state of Florida. And he did an interview the other day, and he was talking about how Miami is a beautiful place, how his family loves Miami. They really love it there. Miami has a really good school. That's going to be one we have to watch. Now, can Miami overcome what Oklahoma has put in? Tough to say. And secondly, and more importantly, then can they overcome what Oklahoma has done with David Stone? Can Miami get out of their own way? Because I said this last year, and I'm going to say it again. Mario Cristobal owes Brent Venables one of those edible arrangement baskets. Right? I don't know what Brent Venables likes, whether he likes them dipped in chocolate. Maybe he's not a fruit guy. I don't know. That's not for me to know. But I can tell you this right now. Mario Cristobal needs to figure it out and have one of them sent over to Brent's liking exactly. Because Brent Venables got ripped by the national media. The man had never been a head coach before. Even the most hardcore Texas fan in here, let's all be objective. Meet me halfway. The man had never been a head coach before. The Heisman-winning quarterback was ripped away from the team. Multiple other blue-chip athletes walked away from the team. And now you're doing a total philosophy switch on the team. A team that was about offense, and defensively, they were about speed D. Now it's a defensive team running a hard, aggressive, disciplined defense. Total opposite in terms of schematics, everything. So Brent Venables struggles as a first-year head coach. Surprise, surprise, by the way. I talked about this before the first game ever got played, and I'm someone that has a lot of faith in Brent Venables. I have not shied away from that, and I'm not shying away from it now, much like I'm not shying away from the fact that I do believe Steve Sarkisian will ultimately be good for the Longhorns. I believe it. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. That allows me to learn something. But just like I believe that, I do believe Brent Venables is the guy. He just needs to be given patience. He's recruiting better than Lincoln Riley ever did there. And he's doing it off of a season where they weren't in playoff contention. And he's recruiting better. But for as much crap as Brent Venables got, Mario Cristobal didn't. Mario Cristobal is a guy that has been a head coach, that had a quarterback that everybody in college football was interested in. He wasn't in the same situation as Venables. Now, I'm not saying that Miami team was loaded with talent, ready to go, that they were a Ferrari just waiting for the driver to come in there, right? I'm not telling you that they were a race car waiting for Michael Schumacher. But I am saying that when we're looking at some of the things that make college football teams tick, they had access to it, and they still had a terrible year. We can talk about Oklahoma and the year they had. Miami lost to Middle Tennessee State University. Let me run that by you again. Miami lost to MTSU. If you find yourself losing to a 4-letter acronym team, you have some questions to ask. So I myself was asking the question, why is Colin Cowherd, why are all these people talking about Brent Venables saying, see, the first year head coach struggled? Yeah, I think all of us the first year in our job probably struggled some. Goes without saying. Nobody's talking about the tenured head coach that just lost to Middle Tennessee State University. The tenured head coach that returned a quarterback that everybody liked. So we're going to have to see. But know this, Miami is surging in the battle for David Stone. My biggest question will be for Miami, what does your year look like this year? You know, I got a comment the other day, and it was one that, while I disagree with the comment, I do want to talk about it because there is some logic in it. And there's a learning moment for me. There's a learning moment for everybody. The other day when we were talking about the Williams-Nwaneri situation, we said Oklahoma's in an interesting position because it's almost like a wagon wheel that keeps going around, where Oklahoma needs to win the games to win the high-caliber defensive linemen, but in order to win the games Oklahoma needs, they need the high-caliber defensive linemen. Which comes first, the chicken or the egg? One of those situations, right? And now Brent Venables is trying to find a way, to quote Game of Thrones, to break the wheel. Break the wheel so that I can start anew. And I believe he can do it. But I got a comment that said, how can you say that whenever Missouri, a team that isn't winning anything, just won Williams-Nwaneri? First off, I'll say touche. I'll say touche to that. That's a good point. I grant you that. That's a fair point. My answer would be this. This is when we get into nuance, because not everything in life is black and white. There is a lot of gray, y'all. Nuance and context are everything. But you are right. Missouri isn't a powerhouse. They're not Alabama. They're not Georgia. They're not Ohio State. They're not a team where if you're a 5-star, you walk into that door and feel like I am guaranteed to be a first-round draft pick. Why? Because almost every 5-star that walks through these doors is a first-round draft pick. That's not Missouri. Now, Missouri's done well in sending guys to the league, actually surprisingly so, but they're not Alabama. They're not Georgia. So when I got the comment saying, how can you say OU needs to win whenever the team that just won Nwaneri isn't the team that wins? Fair. But the nuance and context we then need to understand is, where was Williams-Nwaneri from? Missouri. Kid wanted to stay home. Both teams played the NIL battle. The kid wanted to stay home. And there's nothing you can do, right? There's nothing you can do about that. There are sometimes that's just the way it is. There have been players that come out of states before that want to stay in their state. There have been other players that cannot wait to get out. So that's when the level of nuance comes in, right? About why did the battle get lost? What were the factors? Home. For David Stone, he's currently in Florida, but he has ties to Oklahoma, which makes the nuance of this battle amazing because it can go anywhere. Now, Oklahoma has been chipping away for so long. I think they're in a good position. But we also do need to understand that Mario Cristobal is an elite recruiter. We also need to understand that the big bad wolf may also be knocking for David Stone right now because Alabama is trying to get him on campus to visit. they are really starting to ramp up for He, Edric Houston. Some of these defensive linemen, Bama's now starting to knock on their door. Bama historically likes to take their time. I've said this before. Bama, it's not uncommon for them to be ranked 55th in the nation in May or June in recruiting. You look in August, October, they're number one. So the big bad wolf is about to come knocking. Is it enough? I have no idea. Relationships can be impossible to trump. We know this. But David Stone is a battle we have got to watch. Do not for one second think that Miami is not in it. Miami is in a good position. They are going to continue chipping away. Is it enough? I don't know. But we also need to acknowledge the reality of the situation. If this was the same battle that it was 4 months ago, where it was OU Michigan State, OU would be running away with this right now. But there are other teams involved, and we have to acknowledge that reality. David Stone, one we're going to keep up with, a battle that is must-win for the Oklahoma Sooners as they don't win the Williams-Nwaneri sweepstakes, though important to note, Brent Venables, Todd Bates, they are all going to keep in contact with Nwaneri because, like I just said with Miami, Drinkwitz is in a position where they got to win. They have got to win. It was really cool to see that video of the coaching staff celebrating Williams-Nwaneri. Come on, that was cool. That's awesome. But they need to win. And if they don't win, he might decommit. Who knows? So we're going to have to see that right there. But now let's get into this last topic because this is one I've talked about before. But with the AP poll dropping, with the season right around the corner, I feel that it's time we talk about it again. USC season expectations. Because I get asked the question time and time again, and I think about this far too much. It's probably a little bit obsessive at this point. What will the USC Trojans do this season? They've got the best quarterback in college football. They have got some very talented offensive pieces. They lose Jordan Addison, but Jordan Addison wasn't their wide receiver one last year. They returned their wide receiver one from last year. Have some very other talented pieces. Zachariah Branch is going to be awesome to watch. They've got some talented running backs. They lose the running back that really was awesome for them last year, an area I am interested in seeing, how you replace Travis Dye. But they are talented. Nobody is going to be sitting there thinking, how does USC replace an offensive running back, right? Or how do they replace a tight end? That's not what anybody's going to be thinking because one, they have Caleb Williams. Two, they have Lincoln Riley. The question, the only question that need be asked about USC, what in the world is that defense going to look like? Because I have said this time and time again. I'm going to say something right now. I wouldn't be shocked if USC made the playoffs because you can make the playoffs being a one-sided team. We've seen this. You can. Now, we're going to talk about USC's path to the playoffs here in a bit, but indulge me this so far. I wouldn't be shocked to see USC. I'm already thinking about the O'Malley fight this weekend as I'm saying UFC. Jeez, there we go. Going to be a great one, by the way. But entertain me here. I wouldn't be shocked to see USC in the college football playoffs. But where I draw the line, you cannot win a national championship being one-dimensional. You can't. And until I'm shown proof that you can, I'm not going to believe it. The worst defense, I personally, and granted, guys, I'm only 28. So it's not like I have this vast amount of experience to be able to bring to you, but I'm an insomniac and I'm a little bit OCD. So all I do is watch football. This is what happens when you create a hermit that's OCD and likes staying home. I watch football. The worst defense I've seen win a national championship was that Auburn team with Cam Newton, where their defense ranked 58th in the nation. But even then, man, like so much has changed in college football since then. Offenses have gotten better. They've gotten faster. The spread offense is more commonplace now. So there's no world where you can convince me that you're going to have a bottom third defense in all of college football and win a national championship. Now, then this begs the question, how much will have USC's defense improved since last season? They got some guys out the transfer portal I really like. Hell, they have a guy on that defense that, to me, if you were asking me my freaks of college football, there's a guy on their defense I actually would give you. That's Eric Gentry. He came from Arizona State. He's a 6'4", 6'5", 6'6" inside linebacker that has the ability to do a lot. He is a really fun player to watch play the game of football. I rooted for a lot of those guys that transferred from Arizona State. So I think Gentry is a dude. They have Shane Lee there. Very cerebral football player. And they did get Anthony Lucas, very talented, came from Arizona, I believe, so he finds his way back in that vicinity. And then finally, Bear Alexander. But is it enough? Because my question isn't as much about the talent that USC has. My question is the defensive coordinator, Alex Grinch. And I'm going to say this. One thing you all can guarantee me, if you've watched my content, I'm not somebody that calls for anybody's job. I wouldn't qualify or quantify myself as a sunshine pumper, but I got out of the legal field because I was working in a personal injury law firm. There's some dark stuff you see in personal injury law firms, dealing with insurance companies, dealing with hospitals, dealing with wrongful deaths. You see some dark stuff. Not fun. So I started doing this because I wanted to talk about the positive aspects of things. So I wouldn't qualify myself as a sunshine pumper. I will always give you the situation and say, this is the reality of your situation. Here's how you can move forward. I'm not going to sit and stew on the negative, because there are too many other people that are going to do that, and that doesn't advance anything. Remember, we talked about the Pac-12. I'm about action, not inaction. So I'm not going to sit and stew and tell you, oh, it's this, that, and the other. It's mum. Let's pivot. Let's talk about how we can move forward. I was shocked whenever there wasn't even apparently a conversation about moving forward with a different defensive coordinator. Because one thing we need to realize about Alex Grinch, this is USC's last real big chance to make a splash. You have Caleb Williams, who is going to the NFL after this year. Let's be honest. He's either the number 1 pick in the draft, or if Drake May goes out there and is undeniable and Caleb is Caleb, we'll see. But I think Caleb's the number 1 quarterback off the board. So next season, you're not going to have Caleb Williams. I don't believe Dorian Singer is going to be there next season, and he was a big part of that offense last year. I think he's going to be a big part of that offense this year, but though on Dorian Singer, I'm not 100% certain, so don't quote me there. So you're not going to have Caleb, and you're going to be going to the Big Ten. The last time Alex Grinch was in the Big Ten, he inherited a defense that was a top 25 defense in the nation, and by the time he left, they were like in the 80s. So we've seen Alex Grinch's defensive philosophy in play in the Big Ten, and it did not work. In fact, I would argue that if you're Alex Grinch, your defensive philosophy is best built for the Pac-12, which doesn't exist anymore, ironically. Not in its capacity, and it won't for long. So USC, this is a huge year for the Trojans. Nobody's questioning what they do offensively. Everybody is questioning what they do defensively. Because you're not going to win a national championship being one-dimensional. And let's even talk about them getting to the college football playoffs. Because they've got an interesting schedule. You start against San Jose State, that's going to be a bloodbath. Nevada, bloodbath. Stanford, bloodbath. Arizona State. Look, I'm going to be very honest here. I like what Kenny Dillingham is doing out there. I love that he got Brian Carrington, and I love that he got Rashad Samples. I think those are 2 of the most undervalued hires we've seen thus far. Arizona State has got a lot to clean up before they are in a position to where we can really talk about them with any ferocity, with any seriousness. We have Colorado next. I like Colorado. I think Coach Prime is going to do awesome things there, but I am also of the mindset that they won 1 game last year. Everybody out there expecting Colorado to win 8 games this year, that's wild. They won 1 game last year. Let's see what they do, right? They played USC close for a bit. I just don't think they have enough talent to run with USC, and I think USC is used to the talent they have now. So I don't think Colorado's got anything to say to them. Zona, we'll see. But this is where it gets interesting. You have Notre Dame, October 14th. After Notre Dame, you have Utah. That's going to be a tough 2-game stretch. After Utah, you go into Cal. After Cal, you go into Washington. After Washington, you go into Oregon. After Oregon, UCLA. So that October 14th, that starts a nice little stretch for USC. That starts a nice little stretch for USC. It's going to be so much fun to watch their season this year. Because let's be honest, I said this the other day, for whatever reason, and I can't tell you why, that USC Notre Dame game for me moves the needle. It always has since I was a child, and I'll tell you why. It's the propaganda of Rudy. That messed me up as a child. Don't let your children watch it, because now Notre Dame for me is held in this high pantheon, and I don't know why. It is what it is. That game's going to be awesome. Y'all know how highly I value Washington and Michael Penix. I thought, personally, he had an argument to go out on Twitter and say, I got snubbed from the Heisman. He should have been in New York. His numbers were sensational. Michael Penix was on fire last year, and they have a quarterback outside of Michael Penix that they like. So that's going to be very interesting. Washington's going to be an interesting team. What does Oregon look like? Going to be a ton of fun to watch. Bo Nix really came alive last season. So USC has got a difficult path to even get to the college football playoffs. That defense is going to be the biggest question. And guys, if it is not fixed this year, I do not know how Alex Grinch can come back, because we have seen the speed D in the Big Ten. We watched him take over an Ohio State defense that was a top 25 defense in the nation, and he didn't last a year because that defense fell off a cliff and they had to pivot. I don't know that the speed D is going to work in the Big Ten. You're in the Big Ten next year. So unless you start figuring it out this year, you're going to have a lot of trouble going into the Big Ten. Let's hit some comments and then we're going to get out of here. Oh, Rick says with the portal, you just plug and play. You can. You absolutely can, Rick. I often wonder, though, and I'm not saying you can't, but I do question, can you win a national championship building large swaths of your team from the transfer portal? We've seen teams use the transfer portal as a Band-Aid. Landon Dickerson for Alabama, Jamison Williams for Alabama, Joe Burrow for LSU. So I can give you players that were instrumental to their championship team. Can you rebuild a program from the transfer portal? I don't know the answer to that yet. I think it's far too early for me to definitively say no, but I will give you my opinion on the matter, and I don't think you can. That being said, I do love some of the additions that Lincoln Riley and them did get out of the transfer portal, but that circles me back to my biggest question isn't with Bear Alexander. It's not with Anthony Lucas. It's not with Braylon Shelby, Tackett Curtis. It's not with Eric Gentry. It's not with Shane Lee. It's not with Damani Jackson. It's certainly not with Coach Williams. I mean, I think that was Lincoln's best move thus far, is retaining Dante Williams, because if he didn't retain Dante Williams, you don't have Damani Jackson. Damani Jackson is in Crimson. We're talking about an entirely different situation here. My question isn't with any of that. My question is Alex Grinch. Is this the year we see his defense come together? So I hear you, Rick, and I don't want you thinking it's the talent I'm questioning. They got some pieces I do like. I do. But does the scheme allow them to be successful? That is the question we need answered. That's what I'm interested in. Uncle Phil getting unproven freshman $500K. Yeah, everybody's paying for everything, man. That's just the nature of college football. That's NIL. Everybody's paying for everything. And look, they're recruiting in the trenches. Yeah, this is another thing, Monty. And this is something, Monty, if you have the answer for this, please let me know. Because Josh Henson did great things with that Texas A&M offensive line. You'll remember that Texas A&M offensive line when they played Bama and beat Bama 2 seasons ago. They limped into that game. They were in shambles. They had a bunch of freshmen, a bunch of reserves, and Henson coached them up that entire year and had them looking really solid. I'm surprised that they aren't recruiting the trenches better. They lose Manasseh Ititi to Florida State. I get it. He's not a top 300 prospect yet. I've said this all the time. The young man just started playing football. He came from Africa to the United States to play basketball, found the gridiron, and then realized I'm Himothy. He's 331 in the nation per 24/7 Sports Composite, per the 24/7 Sports rankings in and of themselves. He stands at around 150 in the nation. He's played football a year and a half, 2 years. That cat's going to be something good. I thought that USC, that was a blow for the Trojans. And I think it's also a blow that Brandon Baker, I don't know how closely he's considering USC. They need to land some tackles and guards now. And I get it, Rick, you're not wrong if you say, oh, well, they can grab them from the transfer portal. At a certain point, you have to develop your own talent instead of hoping you rely on someone not being happy with their situation, someone not getting a starting job. Your national championship winning teams, they've used the transfer portal as a Band-Aid, not as an ability to completely overhaul vast swaths of your team yet. Now, maybe this year I'm proven wrong, and I would love nothing more than that because it provides me an opportunity to really do a deep dive and to learn as to where I was wrong. But until I'm wrong, it's going to be interesting. Rick says that's why we play the game, and you are 1,000% right there, my brother. That is 100% why we play the game. I can say all of this, and USC might go out there and skull drag everybody. Who knows? Who knows? I do really think, though, that defense is something we've got to watch. Brandon Baker is Oregon or Texas. No doubt odd future, but that's just so wild to me. You have Josh Henson out there. You have USC. You have got great NIL opportunities in Los Angeles. Get that young man to stay home. You have got to have offensive linemen. Because you go to the Big Ten next year, you don't have Caleb Williams. And you might like Miller Moss. I like Miller Moss. I think he's very good. You might like the 5-star quarterback you just got, Malachi Nelson. I like Malachi Nelson. I think he's really good. Is he Caleb Williams? Tough to say. Tough to say. So, a lot of fun stuff coming up. We'll be back Friday. Y'all already know what we do. Let's hit some comments and then we'll get out of here. Tijuana says, doubt a sleeping giant blue blood until they wake up all you want, but it won't change anything when they do wake up. You're not wrong. You're not wrong. SC has been playing the best of the big in the Rose Bowl for a long time, and we do have a winning record with the 12 teams in the playoffs come 24 Wild West. True, Rick. True. And once again, my issue isn't with USC. I said before USC hired Lincoln Riley, USC is probably the team in college football I wanted to return more than any other team. Because my childhood was those USC teams, man. I'm 28 years old. Like those formidable years where you sit down with your father or your mom or your family and watch college football. I remember watching the Sean Alexanders. I remember watching for Alabama. I remember watching the USC teams with Pete Carroll, those Mac Brown Texas teams, unbelievable. I know what USC is. Don't get that mistaken, Rick. My question isn't with the Trojans. My question is with the defense of the current defensive coordinator and how that fits into the Big Ten, the actual schematics. Because brand-wise, USC is awesome. What about Mateo in USC's backyard goes to Oregon? That's another one, man. Mateo is a very, very talented kid. Very, very talented kid. USC will be just as good in the Big Ten as OU will be in the SEC. Now, here's, Ron, where I will push back on you here. One of them, if USC gets a different defensive coordinator, right, if they make a move, God forbid if they hire Jim Leonhard, right, as defensive coordinator with Lincoln, we'll have some conversations. But at least with Oklahoma, you have a defensive-minded head coach that can start building you in a direction that is conducive to success in the SEC. Right now for USC, they need to start recruiting those trenches hard on both sides. On both sides. He's going to start. Hey, yeah, that's going to be fun. Coaches don't tamper. The players on social media do. Now, hey, and this is one thing I will say. Tampering is a slippery slope because of what Rick just pointed out. And Rick, this is a really good point. And I'm not saying it doesn't happen, Jason, but I will say this. A lot of your tampering is not done by coaches. They don't have to, because there's no laws stating that a player can't reach out to another player. So they just get the players to do it all for them. There is tampering, but they're using loopholes to get through it. Now, is it the direction of a coach? Probably. But there's a lot of loopholes they're using to get out of the tampering stuff, right? It's happening all across college football. Heck, they tried to poach kids from Bama's roster. People have tried to poach kids from Texas's roster. It is what it is. But guys, with that being said, we will be back Friday, 10 o'clock, doing this. You know what it is. A lot more to talk about. We'll talk about some more SEC teams. We'll talk about some Big 12 teams. Do a deep dive into Oklahoma's season. Talk about the expectations the Sooners should have. And then after that, you already know, you can find me Friday evening right here, 5:30 Central Standard Time. We'll have the guys in, be chopping it up, talking all things college football. Y'all already know, if you enjoy the show, be sure to like, comment, subscribe. All that means a ton. Thank you for all of those that came in the chat, interacted. Always a great time. Until next time, that's it. We'll see you. In the spinning wheel of doom.